Oh, high five. Yeah, great. Copenhagen in December 2009. All of the countries of the world had just gathered for the climate conference with a hope on creating a better world, and it had ended in massive failure to reach an agreement. It was a cold, damp, grey month, like it always is in December in Denmark. I'd just been fired from my job, and I was cycling around, mostly thinking about all of the horrible things I wanted to do to my ex-boss. Revenge is very motivating. When I cycled past this scene up here, very difficult to see in the dark. It was dark that day, but this shows, in a little scrap of land, around 20 beehives sitting waiting for the string. I was intrigued. I'd gone past that way lots of times before, never really noticed them, but there was a telephone number on the fence, and I called the beekeeper and went to meet him. And on that day, I discovered a fantastic, beautiful, parallel universe existing in all the hidden spaces, the overlooked corners of our window boxes, the trees and the bushes that are outside the window right now, right in parallel with the universe that we live in as human beings in the city. It was quite fantastic. I don't know, has anyone ever done this? You go to a beehive, you open the lid, there's a smell that comes up, you lift up these frames. 30 to 40,000 sniffing, licking, dancing, sucking honeybees. It's like looking down into a little human society in lots of ways. It's incredibly sophisticated. It's not just a queen and workers. What you also get in that beehive are bees doing the building. You get bees doing the sort of guards. You have nurses. You have cleaners. You have bees that are shifting honey from one place to another and making sure everything is in control. You actually also have a lot of bees that look really busy, but when researchers follow them around from one place to another, it turns out they're actually not doing anything. Those are called the lazy bees, the happiness officer bees, maybe. It is quite magical and completely to be recommended. One of the first beekeepers I met, he told me this fantastic story. He said that 100 million years ago, the late Cretaceous, dinosaurs, volcanoes, mud, all this kind of stuff, the world was black and white. At some point during this period, the first ever primitive bee flew from the first primitive flower and landed on the next primitive flower and discovered a new kind of sexual relationship, pollination. And as a result of that experience, as a result of that pollination, everything we associate with the richness of the world today, so color, taste, smell, all the fruits and vegetables, all the sort of sticky, sweet things that not only support a more beautiful life for human beings, but all sorts of other species at the same time, evolved in an incredibly short amount of time out of that partnership. It's quite fascinating and quite magical. And what occurred to me when I found out about it, two things. One is that this isn't a question of work for bees. This is a question of pleasure. These creatures have their bodies built for pleasure. Little hairs that can sense vibrations and electricity. They see colors that we can't imagine. They smell many times better than a dog. For bees, the work that they're doing isn't work. It's driven by the experience of tickling and sniffing and smells and tastes on their bodies. The other thing that occurred to me, that this process, this idea of pollination, it isn't just a metaphor for the kind of world that we want to create that becomes richer over time and more diverse, but it's also a means to get there. And that's when I got the idea to start this company. But before I go on to explaining how that worked, I would like to give it a little bit of context. Now, we're here to talk about happiness at work. But work itself at the moment is undergoing possibly the most radical and dramatic transformation of any point, of any times in the last 300 years. So you can say that 40 to 60% of the jobs that exist in the work market today, they're disappearing as a result of technology. For an awful lot of people, the security and expectations around work no longer exist. The role that work used to play in our society is beginning to change. And this is enormously meaningful and dramatic for the way in which we live together. And we've seen the results in, for example, the election of Trump in the US, with Brexit in the UK, Here in Denmark, we have a government that is tearing chunks out of the welfare state. We have a government that has created a particularly hostile environment, firstly towards anyone who happens to be foreign or an immigrant, but also in terms of the people who are suffering mental health problems or long-term unemployed. Life is getting very difficult for many of them. So it occurs to me that the happiness part, we can all aspire to that. We all know what happiness looks like. But increasingly today, the work bit is a bit more difficult to understand. In fact, I would say that for anybody who is active in the work market today, or about to be, or would like to be, the fundamental challenge of our time is to navigate this change in such a way that creates more space for people and enriches the environment. And what does this mean? Well, this means several things. First of all, we need to redefine together what counts as a valuable contribution to our society, and to set a question on whether or not it's just work. Secondly, we need to look at more political changes, so changes to the tax structure. We need to introduce a universal basic income to find places to these, find space for the people who are now disappearing from the work market. But there's also more that we can do right away and right now. In my project, in Bybi, our objective is to make passive consumers into active co-producers of the environment. So everybody who comes in contact with our organization has to somehow change their behavior so that they start planting more flowers, they enrich the environment, they create new kinds of contact between different sorts of people. So how does that work? I'd just like to explain in the last few minutes here. This is Arif. He is leader of our team of beekeepers. He's here on the roof of Tivoli Gardens. Arif is a refugee from Syria, so 4 years ago he was looking after bees in the hills north of Aleppo. Now he lets himself up onto the rooftops and yards of around 30 different large corporations in and around Copenhagen and looks after their bees. The bees that he looks after, they fly out into people's gardens and window boxes and pollinate their apple trees and strawberries. Organizations actually pay us to do it, but it's not just about looking after the bees. We do everything we can to engage their employees and engage the physical spaces around these offices in making them to a richer place for environment. So one of our projects we have is at L'Oreal. L'Oreal have this enormous warehouse and this very sort of boring patch of grass outside of it. Last year they started a project with us, and Arif made great friends with Thijs, who was the leader of the warehouse. Now, once a week, Arif knocks on the door, and Thijs comes down, and they go and look after the bees, and they learn a little about what's going on inside the beehive. A couple of weeks ago, Thijs called me. He said, "This is really great, but it's not really enough. We've got this grass. What can we do to make this area better, not just for bees, but also for butterflies and also for our employees and other wild insects?" So they've dug up the entire grass area. They've planted it with wildflowers. We talked about how it should be planted as well with fruit trees and with berry bushes so that the other employees in the organization can come down and pick flowers, which they can give to each other or take home or collect fruit or apples during the right season. In this way, that little activity around the bees has generated a richer and more beautiful and more inviting environment for the entire business. And this is a process that we try and fold out in all of our organizations and all of our contact. So for every flower that is planted, you change the possibility to create another kind of honey. For every person that comes in contact with our organization, you create a relationship between different sorts of people and another way to produce the honey that comes out at the end. So this is a course that we run, again with refugees, but we work with social housing projects and homeless people as well, where we gather people together, teach them about beekeeping. Arif was teaching this particular group. We've got other groups as well where they gather once a week, look after 50, 60, 100, 200,000 honeybees, which fly out over the city, collect the nectar and bring it back. They're involved in making the honey. We buy the honey back from them and then sell it on again into the city. This is a project that we're doing with children. We have school groups that come in. People who are invited into our factory get the opportunity to draw their own labels, to participate in packaging the product. We work with artists and chefs and cooks who have all sorts of fantastic ideas about how these products can be used in different sorts of areas, different ways of creating new connections between people in cocktails, in cakes, in small productions that people decide to do by themselves or with friends. Honey, of course, is a raw material that can be used for all sorts of different things. So we work with a whole range of little local producers in Copenhagen. Small organizations that are making handmade candies with ice cream, with rum, with beer. All of these organizations can be connected into our universe and encouraged in different ways to create new opportunities for people and more connections with our environment. We say with our products that our product isn't a product in itself, it's an invitation to make a change. It's an invitation to plant a flower, to see the environment in a new way, to connect directly the homeless person or the refugee from Syria with the buttered toast and honey that you might enjoy in your kitchen with your children on a Friday afternoon. And what's most spectacular about this is that every street, every garden, every park, every window box has its own unique flavor and its own unique color. So over the course of the years we've been making this project, we have 30 different places around the city. We harvest 3 times, depending on the weather, depending on the flowers, depending on who's been involved. Each glass has its own unique story to tell. And that is what we believe is how you can start a revolution that changes the way in which we see the environment and work in the environment. And that is why honey is something we make together.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I think it was quite mind-blowing to hear you explain how the world looks, what the world looks like through the eyes and the mind of a bee. That a bee is a creature of emotion, at least as much as human beings. The bee's perspective. I think I'll return to that in my second question. But the first one is about this project and the people participating in it. What does this do to the people who participate?
Well, I think one of the themes that we talked about today is this idea of identity and belonging. Many of the people we work with, for them it's quite utopian to imagine that they will come into a normal 9-to-5 job and have a career that will progress over 30 years. What they desperately need and are thirsty for is a way to contribute to society, a community they can be part of that is inclusive enough and recognizes what they can do that isn't necessarily just working. So looking after bees, planting flowers, enhancing and enriching the environment, helping each other. We work with people who are, some are employed, some are volunteers, some are half employed, half volunteers, but at every contact we make, we're building up an inclusive community of people from all walks of life with a shared vision and a shared idea about this being a way to make the city richer environmentally and more open socially.
It's about purpose and meaning.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Let's return to the bees, because you are a bee charmer, aren't you? You understand bees. So, you see people here working with workplace happiness, really passionate about it, who want to implement the principles we're talking about here today. If bees could speak, what would you think that bees would say to the lovely people in here?
Shall I say it in English or in bee?
Start in bee, please.
What is particularly interesting about bees is throughout history, throughout every culture of the universe, human beings have a special relationship to bees and to honey. But what we see in bees is actually a reflection of the society we come from. So the ancient Egyptians, they saw honey as being more valuable than gold. The ancient Greeks saw this kind of pyramid structure, so they were very sort of interested in the order of the bee society. In the 70s, they discovered that honeybees were actually democratic, that it's not the queen that decides, that it's the bees themselves that do it. I think what we need to learn from bees today, all of you who are active in the work market, it's how we can change the way we interact with nature and work with nature. It's how we can use the overseen and overlooked spaces on the rooftops of your offices, in the gardens of your car parks, the extra resources that otherwise might be sort of wasted in your businesses, the cardboard boxes get thrown out, the water that gets used, how these things can enter a wider cycle that creates a form of growth that isn't about money and about just human prosperity, but about a prosperous, robust, and resilient environment for everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, the bee charmer. Thank you.